that is usually, music to a lot of people's ears. Firoz, your take.
Okay, hi everyone. I think we'll just begin in 2 to 5 minutes. Um, we are live right now on YouTube as well, not on LinkedIn today. So Aditya, I think I've just sent you the co-host. Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, Krishnan. I think we'll just have a few more guests and just give us 2 to 3 minutes.
Yeah,
I
sure.
think. Sure. Thank you so much. So I think since we are live, just to give an intro to those who are watching us on YouTube, I think we will discuss today the G20 Delhi Declaration and obviously the outcomes of the summit from three aspects. First, we will try to discuss obviously the geopolitical achievements because we have to do that. You know, the Ukraine thing, the Canada thing, everything. Then we will try to discuss obviously, certain policy aspects like debt restructuring, science and climate and finance, DPI, a few of them which are important to us as speakers and even us as hosts, Aditya and I. And I think in the end we will try to also discuss whether India really has arrived at the world stage or we have punched above our weight, in terms of, because a lot of things in the declaration are great, but
And Abhivadan, in addition to this, I
significant
think
difference.
a couple of points we can cover up within these points itself is one is the major bilaterals, and another
Yeah.
thing that can be covered within this is the side event that has happened along with the G20 event, that was the President Biden's historical visit to Vietnam. So we can also discuss that.
Yes.
So we can cover up everything as
Even
part of the package.
Even the Jakarta visit by the Indian Prime Minister. So I think we can also discuss Prime Minister Modi's visit. Okay, so we have views as well. I think Rishabh might join in a while. So my suggestion is let's just go ahead. What do you think, Aditya?
Yeah, I will just, instead of you have kind of gave the introductory remarks. So instead of asking question, I will just let first you and Krishnan talk what they think of the summit in like short summary. So use, please.
Well, I'll be brief so that we can come back to specific questions later on. But overall, it was a little more successful than I thought it would be. I say this because of IMEC, which is the India Middle East Economic Corridor, and also because of the joint declaration. I know, I mean, everyone says it's a top shop, it doesn't really matter. But I think when you're seated at the big boys table and you're able to come to a consensus, despite the atmosphere being fraught with tension and there gently existing a mood of obduracy, I think it was a great achievement. I was also extremely surprised at how strong of a stance India took against Canada. I tweeted about this when it happened, but I had said that this kind of language is typically reserved only for the Pakistanis. I mean, you will never see the MEA talk this strongly about a country like Canada, which even I know the Harper years weren't like the best years, but it would have been inconceivable under the Harper years. That being said, these were like sort of the main takeaways for me. I think India solidified its standing on the global stage. There will be challenges, of course, but if this is the way we react to those challenges, I think we have a really positive trajectory in front of us. Of course, everything is subject to change, but I would say the visit went slightly above my expectations of what I had expected. I think I'll end with that.
Yeah, Krishnan, can you take up over on that?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Of course. Please continue.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I think this G20, specifically this summit, has been an enormous success internationally. And overall, the entire year of Indian presidency of G20 has been a big success, both for us domestically as well as internationally. The way I see it is like the whole idea of hosting the various G20 conferences all across the country, the various meetings that were held, including I think at least 2 or 3 in Srinagar. I think in Kashmir Valley was really like I think we achieved a lot of soft goals pretty quickly in a very minor manner, sending message all across the world. I think we've kind of stamped. I mean, through these smaller meetings, we were able to achieve a lot of pretty quickly. Like what I would say as not a low-hanging fruit, but one that was available specifically because of the G20 presidency, and we made full use of it. And then coming to the summit, yeah, I think you covered kind of, I share almost all the sentiments that he shares on the summit that we saw. I think India kind of, the way I would put it is India read the room very, very quickly. And I think a lot of big countries were caught sleeping, and India took full advantage of it, and we were able to bring consensus. I mean, I think this summit was a time where we showed that we can take leadership and we can provide direction overall to the G20 grouping and keep it relevant, unlike probably how G7 is going right now. Even, I mean, if you see, like, few months back, the NATO summit was held, and then, like, Zelensky was left with a huge disappointment there. So I think compared to that, and compared to what expectations were from an
Yeah, thanks, Krishnan, for those brief introductory remarks. Even I would like to give a few introductory remarks. First of all, I think, as Krishna has said, India has read the room right, and that too on the right, basically at the right time. Basically, everything is about timing, right? In the geopolitics, in the international.
may or if you to kind of realize that only making this about the war in Ukraine and not understanding, how other countries are looking at it, the fallout, etc., that would have been a mistake, and that's why they kind of avoided it. So overall, I don't think there will be a lot of changes with African Union coming into the picture. But what will change, and I'm pretty sure that this will probably go through its own changes. Is I think the accession of new members. I think you will potentially see some of Africa's more important economies like Nigeria, for example, come into the picture. Probably be added as an independent player. And I think there was already talks this time around. Obviously, that did not materialize, and it may lead to some of the other issues that the African Union has within its structure. It's not as united as we think it is. But I think even if, for example, you have some bigger players from Africa having a seat, I think that's an important message. And from India's perspective, it's a win. Will it have will other countries now see an incentive to talk about issues that pertaining to these countries? I'm not very sure, but it does give us also more weightage in some ways that there is a more, let's say, people have now some incentive to hear as well. Whether that would lead to substantive change, I mean, that's very unclear. In the immediate moment or in the immediate short term, I won't say there would be anything big of that sort. But again, just to end with this, and perhaps others can also chime in. You also have to understand West's decision in the context of what is happening geopolitically with regards to a lot of these countries who are going through a lot of political turmoil, right? Almost civil war. You've seen anti-French sentiment, because of the experiences that not just the colonial experiences, but basically power plays happening. And there's also an anxiety in that sense among some of the countries. And I think that's why it was a good decision on their behalf to kind of agree to what India was proposing. Although, let me be very clear, a lot of these countries, especially United States, for example, has supported African Union's accession before India's presidency even began. So just to put it on record. So yeah, in short, probably not so much, but it's a start.
Yeah, before I go to Krishnan, Abhivardhan, short comment from you. So all the talk about global south, global south, global south. I know India means it, but from the West point of view, is it just everyone miming each other, or do they mean it? I mean, I saw ISB US leaders meeting, and Biden was kind of with them. So Biden took his own. He saw the opportunity of a photo op in the absence of Xi Jinping, and that sends some signals. But are they just miming each other, or do they actually mean at some level? Abhi?
Okay, so what I understand is that the term global south has some value, but I completely agree with Rishabh that nothing gigantic is going to happen for African Union member states at all, because obviously, first of all, India will have to steer a lot of aspects, especially in development economics and deconflicting, the relevance of the global south, because you see the global south is represented by underdeveloped, developing, and emerging markets and countries. So the West will give relevance, especially the United States, simply because they know that they have to have certain inroads. They cannot let Turkey, Russia, or China just have their own inroads and let them just stand astray. So they kind of value it, but a lot of things in the declaration are still to be achieved. They're not impossible, which is why I find it congratulatory. But again, my view is that a lot weightlifting will be done by India, Singapore, and a few middle powers, in my view. So let us see.
Yeah, I think some of the interesting achievements were, I think they kind of finalized debt restructuring for 3 of the African countries. If I'm not wrong, Zambia, Kenya, and the third country name I'm not remembering at the moment. And Nirmala Sitharaman also mentioned Sri Lanka debt restructuring was also kind of held by the member state, but it was not part of the common debt framework that was being negotiated under the G20 framework, basically. But still, some things happened. They talked about crypto agenda on global agenda on cryptocurrency moving forward, and taxation, like international tax issues, etc., etc. So there were some little things that moved forward. But on the specific agenda that grabbed the headlines, Krishnan, you follow the global trade routes very closely. You also followed the seaports, how the seaports are part of it. You are kind of interested in it. So the whole India, Middle East, Europe trade network, everyone is talking about that, kind of grabbed all the headlines. I personally think that it's not yet a challenger to BRI as everyone is claiming it to be, but they want it as a pilot project, and if it works, maybe they can scale it up. Everyone, those who are involved in this. So this is kind of an experimental project between Europe, India, other partners in between, US, etc., etc. So, but in terms of logistics, in terms of operational issues, Krishnan, how do you see the whole project?
Yeah, thanks, Aditya. So first, to add on to both Abhi and Rishabh here, that African Union part, I think what is relevant is we've achieved one thing that the African Union members have always wanted: more face time with the global leaders, more chances of encounters with them, more opportunities for them to talk with each other. I think the G20 membership achieves that. So, and let's not forget that G20 summits also includes the IMF and World Bank chiefs, and also some of the UN and WHO heads also who come to the G20. So this is not something where we can talk substance, but this is something where we are talking the rules of the game. So we are not really talking about who won this round, but we are really talking about how the rules of the game can be set. So what this achieves is that any African Union issue that may not be as frequently being talked about, as frequently being discussed by the world leaders. If you see, the West can choose to ignore in the past certain issues because it can just say that it didn't have an opportunity. I think that bandwidth is getting reduced, and the bandwidth for more engagement with the African Union is increased. When I say engagement, it's only primarily in terms of talks, but that's also important. So it is just like kind of like let's say you are playing a 10 card game and then you say like, okay, everyone gets to have an extra card and it becomes 11 card game. So that's exactly what we've achieved here for the global south, for the African Union. So again, it's up to them how they play the cards and what kind of cards they are dealt with, but instead of 10 cards, they get 11 cards. So coming to the India, Middle East and Europe corridor, I think the way I see it is mainly Europe and Middle East as the heart of the corridor, where India and US on both sides will be anchoring it as two markets. So, of course, Europe is a much bigger market, but I think India being on one side of it kind of helps to de-risk and not make um, the entire corridor dependent on just one nature of trade. That is first thing. The second thing is India not just brings market, it also brings capacity. Uh, we'll have to look out for what kind of projects likes of L&T, Afcon, Adani land in these. And what we achieve with this is that we give an option to the all the countries in that particular corridor that they need not choose between a really high paying Western contractor or a totally unreliable Chinese contractor who could uh, play havoc. So we are there as a reliable partner to provide reliable goods as one of the stakeholders. So if it when we are going to talk about actual trade transit, I don't think at this point of time for any India versus European trade, this corridor is going to help much. the Suez will still play primary role just because of cost. The sea is always the king in terms of cost. What it will achieve is that if there are any, um, how do I say, on-demand goods from India to Europe, we would be able to tap into uh, a mode of transportation that is neither as costly as air transport nor as slow as uh, sea-based logistics. What it entails for all the no, this whole economic corridor means different things for different countries. It is not like this is one of those projects where I see where the common interest is pretty small, but the individual interests they all align together so much that bringing them together under a single project makes so much sense. For India, it is about connecting with the Middle East even more and be able to be part of a corridor where it can be right there from the start and play a more significant role. For the Middle Eastern countries, it is about hard infrastructure and better connectivity. And with the Abrahamic Accords coming into place, I think one can see what the Middle East countries are exactly doing here. So they are trying to establish their stamp in the region. For decades, the Levant and Syria and I mean, this doesn't go via Syria, but I mean that entire region has been conflict defined by conflicts, and now when the with the U.S. exiting, and also the how do I put it, the topic of discussion about the region begins to change. Both the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, they want to be there to be able to define what happens in the region, and I think they see that as a leverage. For Greece, it is about establishing itself as an alternative to Turkey as a gateway to Europe. And for Europe, it is about, uh, I think it's mainly inflation and a longer shipping route via Bremerhaven or Rotterdam, going around the European continent to come via Mediterranean is difficult. And also for Europe, it is about showing that it is still relevant in other parts of the world and being able to uh, contribute effectively. Um, but I think the Europe was not part of the overall conversation. I mean, at the leadership level meeting, it was mainly uh, amongst these countries. But yeah, where the US comes in is that it definitely doesn't want extra regional actors that is not desirable to it to be able to set the agenda. So it is at the table to ensure that its interests are still aligned, and that's kind of useful, I would say, because in my opinion, the US is still a receding power, but uh, it's probably its recession from the Middle East is getting slowed. It doesn't want to lose all its influence. So in that way, I think this corridor is useful. But if anyone wants to take a cheap transport, I think it will, from India to Europe, it will still be the Suez Canal.
So, use do you think everything fell in place in that region in the last 2 3 years because this was the end goal, or because this has happened because everything fell in place? Is it the chicken and egg question, or it is very clear, like how we have reached here basically? Because there was initially Abrahamic Accords, then ITU2, then Indo-Abrahamic framework. There have been conversations going on. Now Israel, Cyprus, and Greece framework has both plus with US and plus with India. Like they are going to have separate meetings with each. So in that region, in the last 3 years, whatever has happened, including India's presence in all those frameworks. So was this the end goal, or has this happened because those things fell in place, including Adani taking Haifa port in Israel, and says activity in Egypt, and recently Italy showing some interest, including on port activity. So everything in the region, especially in terms of trade routes, etc., falling in place.
So I think generally speaking, India always tries and invests in a region, even if well, I shouldn't say invest in the region, invest in relationships in the region, even if there aren't results to show immediately or like in the next 2 or 3 years, because it knows at some point in time, it may come in handy. Like if you go back to the last time we had this conversation, I brought up Sri Lanka, right? Which is, I had talked about how India talks about neighborhood first, back when India didn't really have the capability that it does today. But there is this sort of trend where India will talk about a policy, and then eventually the capabilities catch up, and India is able to action that policy. And I think, largely speaking, this is a trend you see in this region in particular as well, where India has always invested in having good relationships with certain partners, especially partners that reciprocate, like say CC's Egypt or MPZ's UAE. And but that is not to say that India sort of conspired or engineered the IMEC to sail through. I think that would be giving us a little too much credit. I think we invested in the right blocks. I think the region itself had its own dynamics and its own politics to play. I won't go into them right now because we'd be here forever. But it is sort of, I would say, it is India playing its cards right in the region. And I also think, just to bring this up, because I know Erdogan commented on IMEC, and he said that there is no gateway. I'm paraphrasing, of course. This is not what he said word for word, but he said there can be no corridor without Turkey. And when you look at the kind of route he's proposed himself, it's quite questionable, because if any of you have been following what Daesh is up to in Iraq right about now, or generally what's happening within that region, all is not as hunky-dory as people would have you believe. I mean, there is serious trouble just bubbling underneath the surface. And a couple of variables go here or there, and it becomes much, much darker than a lot of people expect. That being said, I agree with a lot of what Krishnan said, actually. And lastly, I'll end on this. India's relationship with the UAE and Egypt in particular are going to be really interesting to watch. I know Saudi Arabia has come up in a big way, and people are talking a lot about the bilaterals that happened recently. But I think, in particular, just paying closer attention to the UAE and the Egypt relationship will pay dividends later on for any observers of the region. I'll just end with that.
So now let us come back to the neighborhood part. Now, I like the way India has used G20 summit as an excuse to open a diplomatic window for Bangladesh to interact with US leadership, basically, including Blinken and President, which they struggled for months and months, and everyone knows the reasons for that. And we have discussed this before in the space. And I like the way India involved Mauritius, Maldives, basically the neighborhood in the conversation. And on the other side, then Pakistan was completely outside the conversation. So I like the way we have used it smartly. Can you elaborate on that, Rishabh? Because I like the way we let Sheikh Hasina take the stage in the event, and she got quite a good photo ops there.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I think there was some kind of a parlay between Washington and Dhaka, and that's obviously important. And I think a matter of concern, which a lot of people in India don't want to accept. But uh, I think apart from the photo ops per se, we don't know obviously what was the result of that, at least as of now. But I think it was a good start in the sense that it was probably I think the belief that if you have the two leaders meeting, and I'm sure there were other the diplomatic. I'm not entirely sure if the United States and Bangladesh had a full bilateral interaction at every level, but I think even if the top leadership meets in these circumstances, there is some sort of an impact, so to speak, and some things might have been exchanged. So yeah, it was good. It was good for India to use that platform to create that space for especially Sheikh Hasina, who's under tremendous pressure at home, by the way. Again, something that I think people in India do not fully appreciate even today. But I'm not entirely sure if that would lead to huge changes from America's side. But I think it would probably lead to more accommodation from their perspective of what India actually wants, and is signaling to the United States. In terms of getting other South Asian countries, or as we say, the countries from the subcontinent, I think it was a good play, and I think it was also a signal for other players in the subcontinent. I think a lot of people, a lot of times, Indian commentators do not realize that whenever any kind of a polarizing issue comes up, we always tend to say that India is not picking this side, etc. And we talk about all the host of other reasons why it could hurt India's interest. But I think a lot of people don't understand that when India does not make or does make a certain decision which is seen as very independent, it's not just because it wants to make a statement about non-alignment. It is also because it wants to suggest to the world, and especially people in its countries in its neighborhood, that it is not attached or it's not following the bloc politics of the world as it would normally, because that will have a huge impact in how other smaller countries in the neighborhood would deal with the bigger powers themselves, right? And it does kind of, I mean, there are some complication. Obviously, they're not as tangible as people think it is. But yeah, so I think what it also showed to the entire world, especially the players in the neighborhood, that India can traverse some of these challenging balancing in the world stage today, and that will give other countries like Bangladesh some confidence, who again have to deal with China as well, as much as we would hate. So it's good in that sense, and obviously it also sends a message to some other countries like Pakistan, who obviously have their own balancing to do with Washington and Beijing. So yeah, overall a good initiative to do that. I'm not entirely sure though that it will lead to huge changes, but hopefully I think with election nearing in Bangladesh, probably some sort of an understanding of how to resolve issues. Because I think as much as the United States want Sheikh Hasina and the Awami League to loosen up their grip on power, uh, they would also realize what kind of a danger it will pose to India, and what kind of a what consequences will that lead to. Because I think uh, with their efforts to do this, have this pushback against Dhaka specifically, they know they have been very public and vocal about it, and people in India have noticed this. So if there is something that goes wrong in our eastern periphery, some of the blame will go to the United States as well. Although I'm not sure they really factor in that much. But the point essentially was for the United States to again to tell them to kind of listen, and they did listen to some extent. Let's hope that this meeting was not just a photo. But obviously, we cannot deduce that from whatever we know from the public domain up until now. So yeah, it was good.
Yeah, and I like the way I think India made it clear to the neighborhood that their prosperity is attached to India's prosperity, and as long as they don't block India's path towards prosperity, India will make sure that all the other countries in the neighborhood who are friendly to India are also part of the conversation. And that is what I liked about it. Like it was kind of an assurance to them, you will be part of the conversation. And one of the gestures of that was Bangladesh being made part of Biofuels Alliance. And
Biofuel alliance, yes.
yeah. So that was a good gesture. So now let us go to the bilaterals, and let's start with the two contrasting images of bilaterals. Now, in the past decade, we have seen how Turkey and Canada's relations have progressed vis-a-vis India, including various issues, Kashmir, Khalistan, etc. But we saw two contrasting pictures from Erdogan and Trudeau in the meeting. Surprisingly, Erdogan sounded very matured, though not exactly the way we wanted in some of the issues, but he sounded matured. He sounded very nuanced, including grain trade issues in Black Sea, on the India, Middle East, Europe. He had a bit different perspective, but he didn't sound very much agitated over it, or he talked about UNSC reforms, etc., etc. He had different perspectives, but he was more matured. Now, contrast it with this with the way Trudeau got the headlines. I think he didn't even get any headlines until the end of the summit. He was completely snubbed. I'm not sure if this is normal in any G20 event, but I like the way India kind of went about it and made it very, very clear about it. And and of course, everything was just cherry on the top for Indian spectators when his flight got delayed due to technical issues, and we had quite a time with it. Swapnil, you want to get in into it as you have joined the conversation? Hello, are you there?
Anyone hear me?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm not much of a Canada expert, but from what I could gather, after the there were a lot of articles about why his flight broke down and all that. But actually, I know from a friend who works in the leasing industry. He has a database of aircrafts, and they said ki actually the issue with Canada right now is at Trudeau in large. He plays more to his domestic audience, and right now he is under tremendous pressure from Poiliev, the Conservative Party candidate in Canada. And I think that has probably, I don't know, maybe it's annoyed him, or perhaps he has a chip on his shoulder, or for some other reason he decided that okay, this is my opportunity. I can come to India, I can make my point clear ki I will not cooperate with you guys. So he first, before, I think before the G20 summit started, they paused some FTA negotiation, and then after coming here he made a big fuss about our interference in Canada, or which is which is actually non-existence. Because I don't know how many of you know it. There is one eminent former CBC news personality, I forgot his name, he's a old elderly guy, and he made it very clear that there is no evidence whatsoever, and this has been equivocally stated by even the RCMP as well as their spy agency, that there hasn't been any involvement, or perhaps even a shred of trace that Indian involvement was there in the death of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. And despite that, these Khalistani handles keep on tweeting ki we interfered, we got him bumped off, and it's possible ki we may have done it indirectly through their very famous organized crime rings, which are actually run by Khalistanis. And but for some reason, Trudeau decided to interpret it in a different way. He tried to rub that on us, and I feel it was good of our prime minister to make it plainly clear that he did not name Khalistanis by name. If you see the press release, he did not name them by name. He just said we will not tolerate radical extremist elements which seek to, what you can say, injure Indian citizens, and which seek to also destroy what you can say, not destroy, let's say damage Indian embassies or consulates, or perhaps even seek for secessionism within India. And I think that was very smart. And as for his plane, I would say actually it's more to do with the way Trudeau runs his government and manages the national defense budget. It's very low, as even as per the NATO standard of 2% GDP. It's like around 1.2% only. He does not meet even his commitment to NATO. And although they had a replacement aircraft for his VIP jet, like they had bought an A330 just I think a month before, but because the pilots are still in training, they have to get to grips with it. It was not ready for this trip, so they got their old A310 MRTT to India, and it broke down because the maintenance apparently is outsourced to some company in Canada, and nobody knows how these third party contractors actually do perform maintenance. They say it is the best, but we all know that even though on paper things may be as per, what you can say, the regulations, but they may have missed something, they may have not done their perfunctory checks, and still the aircraft came, it broke down. The replacement aircraft, which was also coming in, had to divert to London because it suffered a snag, and then finally they flew in a technician with a part. But in what you can say, in this entire saga, They just what you can say screwed the pooch thoroughly, and I would say it's like a karma in a way for what Trudeau has done. Yeah,
So
that's
you want to jump in because I know it's your favorite pastime jumping on Trudeau and India snubbing him, and mostly I want you to look this, and also I want you to get in uh, the way Erdogan sounded basically. Is he making some soft
Yeah,
changes
so
vis-a-vis India? Erdogan, is he making any changes? Yes,
I
yes.
would I would say this, especially on Turkey, do not trust anything they say, right? Because I think Erdogan does this really well. I mean, and I've seen this before. An entire chunk of the Indian commentariat will look at what he says, and then suddenly they're like, "Oh, his position on India is sort of maturing." And then 3 months later, we find out that these guys are up to hijinks in Kashmir, or they're meeting with the ISI, right? And it's very obvious who they're targeting when they're meeting with the ISI, or who they're targeting when they sell certain equipment to a certain country, right? Um, but with the Turks, I won't trust them at all. In fact, I would say that given the trajectory of India and Turkey, we are going to be at odds a lot more often. And as India's military industrial base scales up, and as we are able to export our armaments and get increasingly involved in places like, say, Armenia, it's going to really grate on the Turks, because there is some debate within the broader commentariat about whether Erdogan is like literally a neo-Ottoman or not. But whatever the case, we know that it's a let's just put it this way: he likes to interfere, right? And there is very little they are not willing to sanction when it comes to this interference. In fact, I remember back when he launched an operation against the Kurds. This is when the Americans were starting to pull up. The just the kind of war crimes the Turkish militia were committing against the Kurds is just unbelievable. I mean, I won't say it over here because it's just incredibly graphic. But when you listen to some of the accounts that the Kurds had to offer, especially what they did when they found Kurdish women, it's just hair raising. And this isn't even getting into what they are allowing the Azeris to do. I mean, I know like a lot of people take umbrage with me saying that uh, Armenian genocide 2.0 is around the corner. But believe it or not, if the Turks had their way and if they were allowed to, they would very easily sanction. So I wouldn't trust the Turks. I would especially not trust this entire perspective of, oh, he's moderating the language, because especially given where India and Turkey's trajectory is going. That's just my 2 cents. So more specifically on Canada, you said that I like jumping in on Trudeau when this happens. Now I take offense to that simply because um, it's true. I mean, that's why I take offense, because I have never met a leader who comes as close as humanly possible to being a clown. Okay, the man is just a complete clown. I have no idea what he's trying to do when it comes to diplomacy. I mean, okay, this guy's coming to India, right? If you want to talk about foreign interference and all that lovely stuff that goes on really well with the super liberal Vancouver voters, okay, fine, that's one thing. Why would you broadcast your intentions? Like, what do you think India is doing? We're just sitting here going like, "Ha, beta, aaja humko gali de." Like, what do you think was going to happen? Right? And on top of that, if his 2018 visit basically set fire to whatever Harper had left him. I am 100% sure, given the opportunity, had India not dealt with him the way we dealt with him, this man was fully ready to just, zip down, take out his 3 inches and do diplomatic peshab all over the ashes that were remaining. I mean, he had come absolutely ready. And I think it is to the credit of the Indian government that we have finally woken up and we're treating him like the utter clown he is, right? Because I don't say this lightly about any other leader, but he is properly coming close to being called a clown. I had, like, to give you an idea of how bad it's gotten, right? I saw an interview on, I believe, the CBC, and it was I think Saskatchewan's trade and energy minister, and the Saskatchewan premier, by the way, is pissed, right? They have actually written a letter to the Canadian government. Long story short, accusing them of sabotaging the free trade agreement that they were going to sign with us, right? It's called the EPTA, Early Progress Trade Agreement. I think that's the whole name for the agreement. Accusing Trudeau and the government of sabotaging it for their domestic purposes. And indirectly hurting Saskatchewan, because I think something like 40%, 30 or 40% of Canada's exports to India comes from Saskatchewan. And I think it was again on a CBC site or another Canadian media site that I had read that their exports went from something like $1 billion to something like $500 million. So Saskatchewan is being hit pretty badly. And when the CBC anchor presses him and says, "How do you know that this is on the Canadian side and not the Indian side?" You can almost see the Saskatchewan guy wants to say this. Sorry, the Saskatchewan minister wants to say this, but he does it in a very indirect way by saying that I've met the Indians, I've talked to them, and long story short, they're ready to do it, but it's our government that's sort of holding them back. And this entire debacle, right, which is the Trudeau years, I have no idea why he's doing it. I genuinely don't. I understand that people come up with this theory of, oh, there's like a domestic constituency that he has to please, so on and so forth. And yes, it may be convincing, but to literally like bring a can of kerosene, right, just pour it over an international relationship and just set it alight, right, to win a few more votes. I mean, who does that? This is like, if you did it in India, I'm not even joking. Like we have a slightly official space, so we are not really into the Gali Galoch stuff. But I think like straight up, you would have done Gali Galoch as well. It's just bizarre to see, especially coming from a country like Canada, where say what you want about Harper, he wasn't this bad, right? Nowhere close to it, and it goes to show you just how far down the diplomatic ladder Canada has fallen, that we are sitting here in this room today, right, talking about how good the Harper years were. Because I remember people used to complain about how bland the Harper year was, right? The years were. They were just nothing there. Relations are just chugging around normally. There's nothing really to write home about. And here we are saying, oh my God, I miss those years. So, I restrain myself because I don't really want to push the envelope with the things I say. But, okay, I'll end with this. I think Rishabh Gulati did not do a good enough job in that 9-minute segment in going. He didn't go far enough in explaining just how bad Trudeau has been for Indo-Canadian relationship. I'll just leave it at that.
Rishabh, now moving on to the final bilaterals. With that, I think today's agendas will also finish. Before moving on to Saudi-US thing, what did you think of like East Asian countries' presence? Like apart from Japanese couple having good photo ops, they had quite a casual night. I mean, there was nothing special that Korean and Japanese, even Indonesian uh, uh, leader had during the G20 meeting. The eastern part of our country had quite a muted G20. Am I right to say that?
Eastern part of our country or our continent? Sorry, just to confirm.
Our subcontinent, like Bangladesh
Ah.
had a good night, but otherwise, like Indonesia, Korea, and Japan, they were quite muted. I mean, I know Japanese couple had good photo ops and all, but apart from that,
I think they had their own bilaterals with America and some of the other countries. Singapore had a good one. So I mean, I don't think. I mean, this is the par for G20 in general. The idea is to to coalesce around some of the collective agendas that you have, build diplomatic support, and much of the work that and the much of the differences that exist actually are expressed or thrashed out in the lead up to the meeting. So you'll probably not see a lot of these things bubbling down on the surface level.
sorry for the intervention. Along with East Asia part, can you also continue on to the Saudi part, like Saudi bilateral? Yes, sorry.
Saudi bilaterals, like especially with India and
Yeah. India Saudi
yes.
bilateral.
Yeah. So I think they had their they had their representation. Obviously, things were a little muted, but that I think is not unusual for these countries. Also, you have to realize that apart from meeting Biden and kind of reiterating some of the things that that they have to do in terms of their own relationships, I think they were also very aware that this was going to be a very polarizing summit, right? So a lot of countries were not walking on eggshells, I would say, but they were aware of the fact that let's not send signals which they don't want to or they don't intend to. So I think that was one reason. And yeah, when it comes to India-Saudi relationship, I think, and we were discussing about IMEC, etc. I think a lot of people have to understand that it's not about searching for alternative routes for now. Again, I'm also not very convinced as of now, because again, it's better to wait for details to emerge before you make any grand conclusions. uh, I don't think it's about finding alternative routes, etc. It's about looking at the existing ones, making trade a little smoother. Working on the logistics issues that are there. Obviously, there are going to be some rail projects, etc., but that will not be directly related in the part where India is connected. But I think what will happen is that Indian companies will get a chance to invest and benefit from it. But yes, there is for now very limited agenda or that is or limited details that are there in public, so I won't go and get into it. But it is also, I think it was also important for the Americans more than the Indians per se, to talk about or to highlight the importance of this, because I think Krishnan was talking about it before, with Saudi and Israel normalization in the offing, and the amount of press that China got for it. I think it was very essential for them to kind of have this symbolic victory of sorts, even though obviously there are still questions around these projects, etc. And I think this is where India-Saudi relationship also comes into the picture. And again, I know people don't want to talk about Pakistan nowadays for obvious reasons, but as we've seen in the past, few days, that saying that Pakistan is irrelevant, etc., in the larger diplomatic globe might be correct, but it still will take a lot of our resources, etc., and a lot of our energies in the future, obviously because we share a border and we know what Pakistan's intentions are. So I think enhancing the Saudi relationship is also very important from the perspective of controlling to some extent Pakistan. Again, I'm not making any grand claims, etc. right now, but we know, for example, that the Gulf countries, especially led by Saudi Arabia, are going to have a lot of sway over Islamabad than usual, because obviously there are other patrons in the regions or in the world, so to speak, are not as receptive to Pakistan as they were before. Now, does that mean that Saudi Arabia is going to give to Pakistan, is going to give Pakistan whatever they need without any strings attached? Absolutely not. But I think here India can leverage what it has done over the last decade or so, use these relationships to use, to kind of not rein in Pakistan's behavior, because I don't think that's going to happen. But I think they can probably use that to signal to the larger neighborhood. And when it came to India-Saudi relationship, I think what MBS said, uh, even though if it, I don't know if he really meant it, but I think that it was a good sign for other countries as well. And a lot of people, I know there are critics who suggest that all the other multilateral forums where China is going to be there, no doubt. Um, all these things are going to turn into an anti-West platform, etc., etc. And it may be true that China and Russia may have that intention, but having countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE on board and having this kind of relationship, and getting them maybe in some of these other groupings, working with them together might be actually a very important thing for us in the future. Uh, Considering that both of these countries are a small part of the group of these, some of the group of these countries are close to the United States, and actually tilting towards the West. So building on these relationships and obviously working on the economic and financial aspects of our relationship is going to be very important, right? And again, just to mention that the much talked about India-Russian oil deals and the charts that everybody puts out. Again, people have to realize that India-Russian oil deal is important, and our purchases were very key. That's why we stuck it out throughout the last year or so. But again, ultimately, it's we have a lot of interest with, or a lot of commonality or convergence of interest with Gulf countries, and import of oil being one of them. So those things, the traditional stuff is going to be of great value. And I think the United States understand that a lot of these middle powers, like they are going to chart an independent path, so to speak, which does not necessarily mean that they are going to hedge very aggressively on every issue. But again, I think it's important that most of us understand that the lot of what these countries do and say is not just about big power rivalries, but also the regional issues and posturing. So all these are, you have to understand why Saudi Arabia is doing what it does. uh, because it has some regional expectations as well. It can see some regional threats. It's trying to neutralize some of the larger groupings or alignments that are happening in their own region. So yeah, I think we need to be careful of overstating the importance of some of these projects. But I think at the same time we don't know much about it. But yeah, I think in general, having that IMEC boost, so to speak, right now, it's not necessarily a bad thing, right? We'll see what actually comes out of it. I think there are going to be good chances of Indian companies investing. That'll be something which we'll look forward to. And I don't mean just imports, etc. Buying up stuff, but actually investing in fiber optical sector, even helping in railways with material and other resources. So yeah, let's see.
Yes, you wanted to interject?
No, I just briefly, I just wanted to make a point. I'd forgotten to make it. I'll just be very brief. The one thing where I disagreed with Rishabh Gulati in that 9-minute segment of his was that Canada isn't insignificant. It's been made insignificant, which is to say that it is the country itself has a lot of potential, and recognizing that India was trying to build ties. But the issue is, I mean, when you have sheer incompetent nincompoops passing off as prime ministers, this is sort of what you get at the international level, right? So, and by the way, Swapnil, I think the ex-CBC guy you were referring to is Terry Milowski. Milowski, I apologize. I butchered his last name.
Yeah.
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 I mean,
Yes.
just to add on the Canada thing once, I think like we've seen like people. I mean, I've always said this, that I think it's important for India to do whatever do whatever is needed to kind of push back against what the Canadians have been saying or doing. Not just because of the real danger it poses, which actually there is one. I think I see a lot of discussion where people are like, oh no, but nothing's happening. It's just freedom of speech. It was just a rally. It was just a poster. Actually, it's not that. If you really dig in, there is actually a lot of conflict that we have with the Canadian security agencies, and it's good. I think it was an India Today show where people were suddenly. I mean, I'm not sure, not everyone, but I think the general public was made aware of the visa restriction that exists for Indian servicemen. That's not news actually, but considering that it gained a new life of its own in the mainstream media, was good to see. But I think those are the issues that we need to. I mean, people would always say, because recently, I mean, I think most of you already know this, but the Canadians, or I mean, we don't know who pulled, but the Canadians would like the world to think that they have pulled from the trade negotiations, right? And that's fine. They are not sending their trade representatives in the meeting that was supposed to be held in October. That's fine, right? But I think it's also important for us to make an example out of Canada, because again, remember, Canada is not the only country which is involved in all this, right? Or which gives an opportunity for these actors to do what they do, right? So I think it will be a little difficult for us to do the same with United Kingdom, or probably we don't have the will. And again, the United Kingdom has its own issue. There's also Australia, where the problem is not that threatening or big, and the Australian public as well as the political class is more, I think, amenable to what is saying. So in that sense, I would say that if you want to send a message to the world about how seriously India takes on this on this issue, how sensitive it is, Canada is the best country for it to to take on. And Trudeau specifically, remember, they are still in coalition government, and they are although again there is a surge for conservatives right now. It's important for India to use, and again, I think India has been very deft with dealing with Trudeau on this trip, not doing anything overtly to embarrass him, or which will seem like they're trying to sabotage something. But again, I think it's something. Again, maybe some say it's karma, some say it's something. Some say it's just it's fate maybe. But a lot of these embarrassments is not something which the Liberal Party does not understand. I mean, they understand that there's some sort of cold, icy behavior from our part, and Indian public is very, very anti-Canada right now. And I remember, 2 months ago when this diplomatic incidents, threatening our diplomats, the lists and all that were put out, and I actually, I was actually tweeting about this, and I said, uh, like, is it time to think of Canada as an enemy, a kind of like an enemy country of sort, like an adversary to some extent? Although obviously it doesn't deserve because of the stats, the stature or the lack of it. But still, I was like, and I was a little hesitant, but I don't think I am now. And I think India has to, and a lot of people will say, oh, this is very aggressive. We don't need to do that. We need a free trade deal. I don't think we do that much, right? There are bigger issue at play here, and I think India needs to make an example out of Canada, not just because it's the right thing to do, considering there are tangible, real issues, but also because I think we can pressurize them, considering the sweet spot that we find ourselves in, and maybe use United States as a leverage, right? Again, if we have problem with how America is dealing with Bangladesh, I'm sure United States or some of the sections of their government, State Department, have some problem with how we're dealing with Canada as well. So maybe there's some deal to be made there. Who knows?
Yeah,
Aditya,
and yes, yes.
just in the words of Anand Ranganathan, just 30 seconds. No, I'm just joking. I'll be incredibly brief. Just 2 points. Number one, I can't go into much detail about this, but I have it on good authority that Canada is quote unquote becoming more concerning, right? So it's not just they're doing their little referendums. No, I mean the threat is starting to transcend that big time, and it's also going to start having really horrific consequences if it's not addressed. That's why you see such a push from the Indian side. And second point, to give you an idea of how deep this division is becoming, right? Going back to the Saskatchewan point, the Saskatchewan didn't find out about the EPTA being off until the media broke the story, right? So imagine that these guys are finding out that a trade deal that affects their region's economy in an incredibly big way don't really find out about the deal being off, right, from the Canadian side until the Indian diplomat speaks to a Canadian news outlet, and the Canadian news outlet breaks the story. I mean, that's how bad tensions within that country have got. With that, I'll just end it.
Yeah, now I will come to the last 2 points of the whole G20 agenda. One is the other 2 bilaterals we had with the US and UK, and the last one would be China. So first, coming to the US and UK, Krishnan, we kind of almost finalized all the commitments we made during the Prime Minister Modi's state visit. Like we finalized WTO disputes, we kind of settled those things. Then India ordered drones. Then we had second ship repairing agreement and extension of all that. Basically, we agreed on the state visit, and the US Congress kind of finalized the transfer of technology things in the US Congress, and they basically ratified the engine deal, and the commercial negotiations have begun. So India-US bilateral under Biden is moving quite fast, actually. Like within couple of months, we made quite a progress on that front. I mean, even you and Swapnil can jump in because they are also kind of good followers of all these defense aspects. So, yeah, Krishnan.
Yeah, I think the more significant one was the summit where Modi went to White House on a state visit. I think that was I think nothing can beat that. So I think that remains probably one of the, I mean, in terms of bang for buck, I think it's right there at the top, only next to what Modi was able to achieve when he went to the US in 2014. That was not even a state visit. I think what this bilateral specifically was just a follow up on the. This specific bilateral was just a follow up on whatever. just this is probably not much related to the bilateral, but just wanted to say that I think we all need to give a.
Is it just me or is he cutting out?
Yeah, it's cutting off.
Yeah, I think intermittently his voice is cutting off. Maybe you, Swapnil, you both can jump in.
Hello.
Yeah, now we can hear. Your
Hello.
voice is getting cut in between.
Hello. Can you hear me?
I think he disconnected.
Yeah,
Yes, Swapnil, we can hear
Swapnil
you. Yeah.
can take over from that on the defense parts.
So regarding the engine deal, the GF414 deal, I would say that it's not exactly what everyone is making it out to be. Like you do not have this 80% transfer, 60% transfer. No, it's nothing like that. Okay, there are and they will never transfer the most important part, like the hot section, the core of the engine will never be transferred. That technology will always remain. The IPR will always remain with GE. They are wily enough to learn this. In fact, if I don't know how many of you remember this, but I think it was just after World War II, when Britain was under a Labour government. They invited a Soviet delegation to their Rolls-Royce factories, and I remember that the Soviets were clever enough that they what you can say, they collected the metal shavings. They saw that they got the drawings for the Neen and the later on I think one more engine was there, Meteor. And those drawings were taken back to the Soviet Union, the metal shavings analyzed for the metallurgy, and they finally managed to make their own copy, the Klimo VK1. And the Soviets managed to put that engine in their two. There were two fighters. One is the Lavochkin LA 250, and one is the MiG 15. The 250 lost the competition. MiG 15 went to service, and it was such a shock to the UN coalition forces in Korea when the aircraft debuted. They thought the Soviets were 10 years behind. And then here comes the MiG 15, and it's literally at the same level as their latest fighter jets. So the US has learned its lesson from this. It will never give you the complete technology transfer for its jet engines. At the best, it will be a partial screwdriver giri. They may give you tech for making some of the compressor section, fan blades, and all, but it will never be like a full TOT. Now, I have not seen the full, what you can say, the actual deal, what they have done, and mostly it will never be given out to the public at large. But it may help our aero engine developments in the future. It may help us make maybe some Indianized version of the F414, but that's about it. And let me be also just as an addendum, the actual TOT is not being negotiated with the US, but it's going to come from France. It's being negotiated with SNECMA. I don't know how many of you have perhaps seen those pictures, but I remember the GTRE director visiting SNECMA's facility in France for a conference, and he was spotted sitting at a presentation meeting. And I think from there we may be able to make a new engine for our future developments, maybe for AMCA, maybe not for AMCA also. It could be for a successor of our Sukhoi 30. I'm not sure, but it is still under works. I'll end it here.
Yeah, Krishnan, continue
Yeah.
from where you left.
Yeah. So the way the whole GTOT happened was like, I think that, so what the technology that is being transferred here is the manufacturing technology, not the design technology or the know-how, right? So I think everyone understands that. There might be some sections that might misunderstand it as, oh, now can we make our own jet engine? So, but that was, I don't think the Indian scientists are like really delusional about it. I think we know what we are getting and they know what they are giving. It has always been about being able to manufacture most of the parts. And Swapnil was right in that we will not be getting the critical the critical part of manufacturing the core. I'm pretty sure that The core will be a black box to us. They will manufacture it and ship it here, and we would be building the rest of the engine around the core, at least the combustion chamber. What I wanted to highlight from a diplomatic point of view is that the news came out that the US Congress has accepted this deal. So the way this works is the administration, the federal government sends it to the Congress for review. And if any of the senator or the congressman has objections, then they will have to raise it within 30 days. The fact that none of them raised even a single question, I think that is kudos to our Indian embassy in Washington, especially the current ambassador who has been doing excellent work for the past 3 years, I think, 3.5 years, or actually, yeah, 4 years now. So that is tribute. I mean, that is really congratulations to him and his team, because we know how Washington works. Every person has to kind of work out, every congressman who is on the caucus, who is on the Armed Services Committee, who is on the Foreign Relations Committee. And so none of the senators or congressmen raising it gives an automatic approval. Does this mean that we have the deal on hands? No, because the whole F414 deal, I think, is going to come only when Indian Air Force places an order for LCA-MK2. So that is still far away. But yeah, this particular bilateral between Biden and Modi was more about taking stock of all of this and acknowledging the fact that whatever big strides they made during the summit did not end with the summit, and it continued beyond. And both sides continue to make effort that they will continue to push for further strengthening on both their sides. And settling of the trade dispute was an important one on that aspect. They wanted to set it aside and focus on more common issues globally, and as well as more issues of mutual interest. I think we are seeing a point where the US is kind of recognizing that its own self-interest is served by working with India. And I wouldn't say that it is doing India any favor. It is just serving itself by working with India. But the fact that it is realizing that working with India helps more than trying to lead is a big win for us. I would like to talk more about the GE transfer of technology, but yeah, probably some other podcast.
But like, can you guys chip in onto the drone part or like the ship repair agreement or the other nitty-gritties that has
Yeah,
happened?
so on the drone part, I think we are going for a larger uh, number of drones than what many of us here were thinking, which was kind of surprise. Um, I would, because knowing the way MOD and services usually work, when the services provide X number, the usual method was to import like a part of that X number and then like propose a domestic alternative for the remaining numbers. We saw that for the Rafale, we saw that for the naval multi-role helicopters, we saw that for quite a few missiles. But this was surprising that we saw like a direct signing of the Avengers for, and I think there was a hint from Rajnath Singh somewhere that the US agreed to transfer certain drone related technologies to India as part of this deal. I don't think it was mentioned explicitly as part of this deal, but I think Secretary of Defense Austin himself also mentioned it once. So I'm not sure what it is, and I don't think it will be revealed fully. But it is something significant. So us buying this many drones is, I think it presses a lot of buttons for us. One is satisfying the forces needs. One is using it as a geopolitical coin of leverage to get certain other things done. You know how things happen in Washington. As well as it is kind of, uh, how do I put it? It's kind of a, in this particular case, I'm not sure how many would agree here. In this particular case, it is an acknowledgement that the domestic hail program is definitely delayed. On coming to the what is the other one? Yeah, the mastership repair agreement. I think they saw how L&T was performing really well in servicing US naval ships, and they are really interested in expanding it. I think if you had looked at some of the Navy and Air Force documents of within the US DoD, you'd see like their costs of operation have been zooming over the past few years without adding significant capability. So they are trying to reduce their operational costs as well as bring down the maintenance and repair costs. Of course, sailing the entire ship back to uh, North America doesn't make sense. So leveraging the Indian capacity is one way for them to cut down costs. The both the Navy and Air Force are really looking at cutting down costs, and I think we will become a big player in that. Whether we will do the same in wartime, I don't know.
Yes, you want to come in?
Yeah, between Swapnil and Krishan, I think I've covered most of the points I wanted to bring up. So I'll just keep mine quite brief. I just wanted to add that, at least from my vantage point, it seems that even though India is not heading in this direction purposefully, I think just the way our own international politics is playing out and our developments when it comes to the military industrial base, I think structurally we are shifting towards a phase where India will start rapidly looking at its expeditionary capabilities. And I don't mean this in the sense of a bunch of people are getting around the table and they're like, okay, India is going to be expeditionary from this point on. I just think that pressures are going to naturally lead in that direction. Because if you look at the way we've dealt with Armenia, if you look at the way we are opening ourselves up, maybe not opening ourselves up, that's too loaded of a term, but entering an agreement with the United States when it comes to things like ship repairs. And when you look at our Act East policy, as well as the, I mean, the quote unquote counters to Turkey when it comes to relationship with Greece and Cyprus, I think that's where we are headed. In fact, I will not be surprised if, I think, if I'm not mistaken, there's already a contract out, or there is thinking on how to make a SPAD GMS, which is a short range air defense system. But I'm pretty sure we'll also move up to trying to build David Sling or S-400 counterparts. I'm not saying they're going to happen immediately, but it increasingly feels like that's where the army is pushing the military industrial base. Of course, it could be proven wrong. A lot of other factors are in play. But that's the one thing I wanted to bring up. And I think just the last point, I think this is happening largely because, not largely, one part of this is the United States starting to see India as sort of a base it can work out of. I know it's like a very ugly thing and people don't like talking about it much. But when you look at the sort of the recent US Navy statement of how they see India when it comes to maintenance and repair, it's quite obvious that if anything goes down in the East, they sort of view India as an important anchor point, quote unquote, to its continuing operations. And while I understand there is enormous reticence in India when it comes to thinking of how India will act in wartime, I think I'm going to put my neck out here and state that a lot of us are going to be very pleasantly surprised or not on the kind of expeditionary nature of Indian foreign policy. I'm not saying overtly stated, but subtly or and in increasingly covert ways when it comes to these things, right? So I don't know if you're going to see, Indian military advisors in Armenia anytime soon. Looking at the way the government of India operates today, it's highly unlikely. But the fact that we are even selling the kind of arms that we are selling to Armenia itself signals a kind of a shift. And I think what you're seeing between the India and the United States is starting to reflect this sort of structural change. And it's going to be really interesting to see where Indian foreign policy goes over the next 20 to 30 years.
Yeah, sorry guys, it's taking longer than usual because of the scale of the agenda during the G20 summit. I think I will wrap it up in 5-10 minutes, so just bear with us for that long. Before going to the last point, Abhivardhan, on the one side, though we had indefinitely paused the trade talks with Canada, we kind of settled all the legacy WTO disputes with United States, and we had quite a good, I think, meeting with Rishi Sunak. And if we were to ever finalize FTA with UK, it has to be under him if it is going to happen. And I think that intent was made clear. So we are moving quite forward on the two of the economic issues with US and UK.
Okay, so just 2 cents. Um,
Hello,
well,
Abhi, are you there?
can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah, we can hear you.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah. Okay. Uh, I think I completely agree with you. There are so many points to discuss. I had to discuss a little bit about crypto, AI, BPI, and even the European Union CBAM and whatnot. But I guess we would have to do a part two. I guess we all agree, kind of. But anyways, on your question on US and UK, um, first of all, I just think that it was a positive reinforcing approach, which actually went well. The electoral situation in the UK is uncertain for the Conservatives, therefore, we don't know what's going to happen. But Rishi Sunak is a very stabilizing force for the UK after the tragedy by the name of Elizabeth Truss. So I think in that case, the UK is trying to be as reasonable as possible, because if you see even the FTA talks, there are specific aspects related to the pharma complex's interests and how India is trying to address them, that what, you have to get on parity in certain aspects. So I think for UK it's reasonable from a policy point of view. Will it reach their masses, and will they understand that? Again, they have a cannibalizing effect when it comes to their understanding of voting on policy matters these days, sadly. With the US also, it's a similar problem. We don't know who's going to win, right? Whether it is Ramaswamy, Trump, or Biden, or I don't know, Clinton, or anyone. But there is also a cannibalizing effect. But I think since the Biden administration has tried to make their political economy a little bit more stable in terms of making things happen, whether it is COVID or anything, domestically, and a little bit pan global, I think the US is trying to pull its punches at its best to see what happens, because it's going to be uncertain for them and the UK. All these three major democracies are going to have their elections in the next year. The UK maybe in December, India obviously in May and April, and the United States obviously with the House of Representatives as well in November, and so forth. So let's see. I mean, it's interesting. Yeah.
So now we will come to the last part of the today's session. That is China. Now China did everything to undermine India's hosting of G20 summit. The President Xi didn't come. There are different domestic issues that's happening in China, but like India has used that as an opportunity to, of course, the most headline grabbing event was India, Middle East, Europe corridor. Then United States had this photo op with Brazil, South Africa, India, basically IPSA grouping, and European member states tried to have again lot of conversations with members of the global south. So West took every opportunity to make sure that China's absent, like China regret its absence here, and I don't think India minded that. In addition to that, parallelly we had President Biden going to Vietnam, and that was quite an historic meeting because Vietnam has upgraded United States diplomatic status within its diplomatic hierarchy, and they had strategic partnership announced there. So overall, it was quite a not very pleasant week for China. Rishabh, Yus, anyone would like to chip in?
Rishabh, I think we should start with you if you wish to, after you, and then maybe use.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we were talking about before the summit as well, uh, obviously we didn't know what we know today about the defense minister in China and his likely removal, etc. But I think still the no matter what was the motivation behind Xi Jinping's absence, I think we can all agree that his absence made things a bit easier for India, or at least convince some other countries to not, as some US commentators would like to say, to hand us the win or as a favor of sorts. but actually understand the importance as to what is at stake, not just for India, but other developing countries and specifically the West as well, right? The fact that he was not there, uh, again, I'm not going to exaggerate the optics of it. Yes, it was bad optics, and you can use that to make an argument here and there. But overall, will that really change or lead to a setback in terms of how the rest of the world sees China? Perhaps not, but the point essentially was to make a point in the sense in the most immediate sense, and enhance India's role and image, so to speak, which I think we were able to do so, right, because of the compromise that we were able to strike with other countries. Now, China obviously did try to do whatever it can, and despite Xi Jinping's absence from the Leaders Summit, and again, now that we know that this could have been related to some of the domestic issues or troubles that he has at home, I think no, I think India is going to use this to highlight to other countries, especially Western countries, especially the United States, that it can play a syncretic or more joint kind of a role when it comes to dealing with other countries in these other multilateral institutions. I think we've had this conversation multiple times in the past, where we were discussing about BRICS and other multilateral forums where India's participation is often questioned. And I think it's a good demonstration for the usefulness or the utility India can have. Obviously, the challenges in those multilateral institutions or frameworks would be a little different, because India would not, or India would have to muster the diplomatic strength for itself by itself, and it won't have other powers joining in, especially a powerful bloc like the Western world. But I think it's still important because it does give India some benefit of the doubt, or it give gives India some sort of a boost, so to speak. Maybe other middle powers can come in and make consensus, and maybe even push China for some concessions when it comes to language, some declarations, maybe even how these organizations or frameworks posture at the global level on global governance reforms, etc., which is again important for everyone. It's not just rhetoric for us also. I think most people don't appreciate the fact that India is a status quo power in a lot of ways. Yes, it wants a rule based order, but not everything that has been there post World War II, right? So I think it's a good demonstration that India can play a good role, not as a bridge of sorts, or not to even sabotage everything, but basically do whatever it can to often embarrass China as well on the world stage. Again, nobody's arguing that we are suddenly going to match China's economic prowess. I think a lot of Indian commentators have this very weird sense of understanding of diplomacy when they say that oh well, China is 5 times ahead of us in almost everything. Yeah, no shit, everybody understands that, right? But the problem is that how do you diplomacy is all about bridging that aspect through other means, right? So even if you don't have that material power, right, you have to kind of up until the point that you actually bridge that gap, you have to use any other tools that are available at your disposal to ensure or to send a message, right? Because I think in the last 2 years since Galwan, everybody's like, we have to send a message, we have to be more publicly, aggressive on China. And I think the best way to do that is not just on the bilateral level, but on the multilateral level, on the global stage, right? And be afraid, not be afraid of, India being seen as taking China's spotlight. So yes, it has limited value, but I think it has served us well in the G20. And despite because a lot of other countries and a lot of people have said that China is trying to ditch the G20. That may be the case. Again, I'm not going to speculate, and they are going to focus mostly on China-led frameworks, etc. That could be the case, but I think if you see the next G20 summit, especially the one in Brazil and South Africa, you will see China participate in a much more forceful way. in a much more productive way. And it is here where I think most other countries would again understand what role India can play to combat sometimes China in those areas. Now, obviously, not everything will be related to Ukraine up until that point. I hope not. But yeah, I think this was a good trailer of sorts of what we can expect in the next 2 years, not just in terms of G20, but other aspects of global diplomacy.
So, use your comments on Vietnam visit of Biden and the trade corridor, like both combined, it was not a pleasant week for China strategically.
Well, let me just say this. I personally missed Xi Jinping's visit to India because we lost out on some good meme creation opportunities. And as the resident Zoomer of this panel, I think as a founding member of the Zoomer Yuva Parishad, the Sansthapak, I can proudly say that Xi Jinping took ate an L, right? But of course, more seriously, I think it was a miss on China's part because for all the reasons that Rishabh covered, but also simply because I think it allowed the spotlight to shift significantly on what India was doing with other countries. I think had Xi Jinping come to the press conference, I think a lot of that oxygen would have been sucked away just by the nature of where the US and China are, and also the kind of stuff that would have happened surrounding Xi. I also think that in some way it validates the Kotkin camp on their take on Xi and what's going on within China. This is of course debatable, but I think the reportage in the run-up to the G20 and what happened within China and what is happening in China, I think it sort of validates that camp as well. And yes, I'm 100% also agree with Rishabh when he says that India is going to be using this to the best of its advantage. In fact, we should. It's a golden opportunity for us. On Biden's Vietnam visit, I was quite struck by the symbolism of the visit. I'm I know people like to talk about the specifics of the result, but just personally, I sort of looked at it from the bigger picture lens, which is to say that here is a country that the Vietnamese fought an incredibly brutal war with. I mean, people often underestimate just how brutal that war got. Partly because of how social media covers it, partly because of how the American media covers it. But when you dig down into the detail and you kind of look at the stuff America was doing in Vietnam and the kind of weapons it was using, it was very nasty business, right? And that same country is now getting a welcome that Vietnam would reserve for very, 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 very few other players in the world, right? And that it is giving the United States this kind of a treatment goes to show you just how on edge a lot of countries are, even if they don't want to overtly talk about the fact that they're on edge. I think secretly, and this is where India will also be able to, or where India will be able to assert itself, will be this sort of silent, like a third option between the United States and China, because things really are starting to get heated in the region. I think I'll end it here for now because I understand we have a paucity of time. But yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it for today in terms of agenda. It was very long, almost 2 hours, I think. Because of the scope of the agenda, there was quite a lot to cover. But thanks for your patience, everyone. Thanks for speakers for joining, Krishnan, you, Swapnil, Rishabh. Abhihotan, can you inform the listeners and everyone where can they access the podcast?
Sure, and I must say very humbly that I think
Abhi?
this is one of. Can you hear me, Aditya?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm just saying that this is, I think, one of the longest sessions we ever had. So congratulations to all, and thank you so much for bearing us. And I hope that we have been informative. So we have been live on YouTube. So you search you even search Bharat Pacific on Google and YouTube. You will find us. You'll find this live session. Number one, on Spotify, you can go Bharat Pacific, search it. You'll get our podcast, all of our sessions from Industry to Global Int to this one. So that's the thing. If you miss on YouTube, you can go to Spotify. If you miss on Spotify, you can go to YouTube. Otherwise, even on our website, bharatpacific.com, you can get access to our podcast sessions and these amazing spaces. So thank you so much for being a part of it. It's been a pleasure to have you all. Thank you, Krishnan. Thank you, Yus. Thank you, Rishabh, as always. And obviously, yes, thank you, Aditya. It's been a pleasure.